Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about one of my most favorite topics when it comes to nutrition, and that is calorie density. It's something we're focusing on this week in the challenge when we talk about nutrition. So calorie density is when you take food and compare food by weight. So if you have an entire pound of spinach, raw spinach, that entire pound is only about 100 calories. Non-starchy vegetables like spinach and broccoli and green beans and cauliflower, asparagus, on average are just 100 calories per pound, and they come packed full of nutrients and fiber and water. On the opposite end of the calorie density spectrum is oil, the most calorie dense food on the planet. And if you have not even 1 tablespoon of oil, you're gonna have the same amount of calories, 100, as in that entire pound of non-starchy vegetables. Which is gonna fill you up more? The vegetables, right? So when it comes to eating smart, you wanna choose the foods that are gonna fill you up. And we know based on science that the foods lowest in calorie density, non-starchy vegetables, fruits, starchy vegetables like potatoes, whole intact grains, and legumes, your beans, lentils, and split peas, they're the foods lowest in calorie density. And especially the starchy foods help fill you up for the least amount of calories. So instead of restricting how much you eat, you just want to choose wiser so that you can eat more of the healthiest foods on the planet. So we're gonna pay special attention to whole grains because there's a really big difference in calorie density when it comes to grains that are intact and grains that have been processed. So come on in and take a look. Right here, I have some processed whole grains. Each of these, we have some granola, we have some crackers, and we have a granola bar. They're all labeled as being whole grain because they do contain some whole grains. And each of these is showing you a serving that equals 130 calories. Whereas corn, which is a whole grain, but in its intact form, it's not processed and ground down into flour, and we don't have anything like added sugars or fats to it. This entire bowl, 2 cups of corn, is about the same amount of calories as is depicted on any one of these other plates of the processed whole grains. So when it comes to whole grains, you can consume a lot more of them for the same amount of calories when you are eating them in their whole intact form. So some other examples, we have quinoa, we have brown rice, and recently I've been loving to make sorghum. So there are lots of other whole grain options out there, things like buckwheat and oats. And when you're choosing them, you can eat a lot more for the same amount of calories of grains that are processed and or have additional things added to them like fats and sugars. So how can we convert some of these whole grains into a really healthy, simple meal? I'm gonna show you. So I've already taken 1.5 cups of a combination of the whole grains. I combined the sorghum, brown rice, and quinoa, and I rinsed it off in a colander first. I dumped it in my pressure cooker with a can of crushed tomatoes, a can of diced tomatoes, and I think I will also add a cup of this corn. So we are getting like a ton of variety of whole grains, which is great because every different plant food that you consume has different types of fibers that are really beneficial for feeding the healthy probiotic bacteria that reside in your large intestine. So you want to be feeding them a nice variety of plant-based foods. I am gonna add some spices to this. So we're gonna do a teaspoon of onion powder, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of cumin. You could add whatever spices you like. And I have chipotle chili powder, which is pretty spicy. So I'm just gonna do like a heaping 1/8 of a teaspoon. To this, I added 3 cups of beans, which is the equivalent of 2 cans. So 1 can of beans is 1.5 cups. I cooked some beans on the stove this morning, so I used these everything's in this pot, I'm gonna give it a stir. Put the lid on. Set my pressure cooker, and in 40 minutes, I'm gonna have a really healthy, high fiber, high nutrient, low in calorie density dinner.
And here is the finished dish. So I forgot to mention that I also added 1.5 cups of water to this before I turn the pressure cooker on. So that step is definitely important. Alternately, you could cook this on your stove. Just bring the mixture to a boil, put a lid on your pot, and turn the heat down to like simmer, and let it cook for about 40 minutes. And voila, you have a one-pot easy meal that requires little cleanup and all whole food plant-based ingredients. Enjoy.